Hello, my name is Jaylene Anderson, and for my presentation, I decided to do the school-to-prison pipeline and how it disproportionately affects the underprivileged. What is the school-to-prison pipeline? The school-to-prison pipeline refers to the process of school policies and practices resulting in the mass migration of students from the classroom into the criminal justice system. What contributes to the school-to-prison pipeline? Many factors contribute to the pipeline, but the biggest being the implementation of zero-tolerance policies. Zero-tolerance policies are policies that outline specific punishments for student misbehaviors regardless of the context of a situation. Beginning in the early 1990s following increased violent crime involving adolescents during the 70s and 80s, the federal government passed the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994. This was the first national zero-tolerance policy passed. This policy mandates that all public schools suspend any student that brings a firearm to school for a period of 1 year. After the introduction of the Gun-Free Schools Act, schools across the country started to introduce their own zero-tolerance policies. These policies included topics ranging from drugs and alcohol to lying to administrators and cursing. Many of these policies require suspensions of 1 day up to 10 days. An example of the newest zero-tolerance policies implemented focus on school bullying. Zero-tolerance policies affect students of color, underprivileged students, students with mental or physical disabilities, and LGBTQ students at a greater rate than any other student. Due to the introduction of zero-tolerance policies, the rate of suspensions increased 87% between 1973 and 2005. The 2009 to 2010 school year saw more than 2 million out-of-school suspensions. School resource officers are the second biggest contributing factor to the pipeline. School resource officers are often regular police officers hired by school districts to act as security in schools. Many of these officers don't have training on how to handle children or how to handle students with disabilities. In the past decade, schools have become so reliant on school resource officers to handle disciplinary action. This has resulted in the overcriminalization of student misbehavior. School resource officers are also responsible for most of students' referrals to the criminal justice system. School resource officers are the direct cause of the increased number of school-based arrests. Most of these arrests are for non-violent misbehaviors such as disruptive behavior. School resource officers also take funding from schools that could be used to pay for more teachers, school counselors, and psychiatrists. More than 2 million students attend schools that employ school resource officers but not counselors, and almost 6 million attend schools that employ school resource officers, but not psychiatrists. Another factor that contributes to the pipeline is inadequate funding. Public schools are funded majorly by local and state funding. They only receive 10% of their funding from federal sources. Because of this, public schools in low-income and underprivileged communities don't have the funds to provide enough resources for their students. Most public schools in underprivileged communities are teaching from outdated textbooks and curriculums, and don't have access to technology like computer labs. This has helped deepen the achievement gap that underprivileged communities and schools face that well-funded public schools and communities don't. Teachers that serve in underprivileged schools are teaching in overcrowded classrooms where they can have up to 40 students per class. Schools have also faced huge budget cuts in the past several years. Because of these budget cuts, they have had to lay off teachers and school counselors and cut extras like after-school programs and extracurricular activities. In the past 3 decades, funding on both federal and local levels for the criminal justice system has increased at 3 times the speed than the public school funding has. This is an example of funding the solution rather than fixing the problem at the source. Another factor involves failing schools that are failing our students. The No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 is a federal policy that punishes schools for students' poor test scores on standardized tests. While this act was meant to help close the achievement gap that plagues underprivileged schools, many schools have reverted to pushing out underperforming students so they don't get penalized. School climate has also shifted in the past 2 decades because of violence and the increase in school shootings. Many schools have implemented safeguards to help protect students, such as surveillance cameras in school halls, metal detectors and bag searches at entrances, random locker searches, the presence of drug-sniffing dogs on campus, and stop and frisk searches. While these safeguards were meant to protect students, many feel that they are preparing students for a life of incarceration. Who is most impacted by the school-to-prison pipeline? Students of color are the biggest population that are being impacted. Black students make up only 24% of the public school population in the U.S., but account for over 50% of all expulsions and suspensions. Latino students also account for 12% of suspensions and expulsions, while white students only make up 7% of expulsions and suspensions. A study conducted in 2008 found that students of color were more severely and more often punished than their white counterparts for the same misbehavior. Students that come from underprivileged communities are also impacted. Mentally and physically disabled students, along with students a part of the LGBT community, are also impacted. Effects on students. Those who drop out because of the school policies in place will face many obstacles in their life. It will be difficult for them to find a well-paying, stable job. They will have a higher chance of being involved in the criminal justice system later in life. This increases their likelihood of having to rely on government-funded assistance programs like SNAP, formerly food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, Section 8, etc. Dropping out will also increase their chance of poverty, and many who drop out are further behind intellectually than their peers. Those who enter the criminal justice system through the pipeline will face many obstacles, both while they are in the detention center and when they are released. Almost 50% of the young adults in the criminal justice system are behind their peers intellectually by several grade levels. Many are either partially or fully illiterate. 65 to 75% of incarcerated youth have or develop mental health issues, like depression, anxiety, PTSD, etc. Many will also develop substance abuse problems. Those in juvenile detention also face abuse. In 2013, a report came out stating that around 10% of incarcerated youth were sexually assaulted. Of those 10%, 81% of the abuse was done by staff members. When they are done serving their sentence, they will face many obstacles trying to return to normal civilian life. They will have a difficult time finding employment, housing, or pursuing education. They will also have a difficult time applying for a car loan, a mortgage loan, or in some states even applying for a license. Efforts to help end the school-to-prison pipeline. The school-to-prison pipeline has become a focus for child development experts, researchers, and reform advocates in the past several years. Many agree that several steps must be made to stop the pipeline, including the reviewing and adjustment of zero-tolerance policies to give the administrators back the power to punish students based on the incident and their extenuating circumstances. The removal of school resource officers to free up funds to bring mental health experts back into schools. The ending of the over-criminalization of children's misbehavior. Proper training of the staff on how to deal with misbehavior when it arises. The reduction in the number of suspensions and expulsions given out to students. And the guarantee that implicit biases, whether due to racial biases, biases regarding sexual orientation, etc., are not involved when deciding punishments and that they are given out fairly to all students. Several school districts across the country have developed new policies and practices to help end the pipeline. An example of this is the restorative justice program, which involves the rebuilding of student and administration relationships, fixing the student's reputation within the school, and repairing harm that may have been done. The restorative justice program is currently being used at the Kensington Creative and Performing Arts School, known as KCAPA, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. KCAPA's restorative justice policy relies on open conversation with students and their feelings, and have developed a peer mediation program to ensure that students always have someone to talk to. Before the implementation of a restorative justice program at KCAPA, it was known to be one of the most problematic schools in Philadelphia and had one of the harshest zero-tolerance policies in the country. In one school year, they had 76 reports of severe student misbehavior. 13 of those involved assault on staff members. Although it takes time and energy to fix a broken system, KCAPA, after only 4 years, saw a 60% decline in student misbehaviors and a reduction in school-based arrests by 66%. The restorative justice program has also been extended into several other schools in Philadelphia, with plans to extend the program citywide. This slide has my references for my research and my picture credits. Thank you for watching my presentation.